If you're over 60 and still relying on the same old advice about managing blood sugar, what I'm about to share might completely change how you approach your daily routine. Recent clinical observations show that 5 specific habits, often overlooked by traditional recommendations, can have a profound impact on blood sugar control in older adults. And the surprising part? Most people are doing completely different activities thinking they're helping, when these 5 alternatives could work significantly better. I'm Dr. Emily Hartwell, and as an endocrinologist who has specialized in metabolic health in older adults for over 15 years, I've witnessed thousands of patients struggle with blood sugar management despite following conventional advice. What I've discovered through clinical experience is that our bodies change dramatically after 60, and what worked in our 40s and 50s often becomes less effective as we age. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend hitting that button and turning on notifications so you never miss another health tip made especially for you. If you enjoy this video, please send video suggestions and questions in the comments. I read them all, which helps me create more content and assist more people like you. Let me tell you about Margaret Thompson, a 72-year-old retired librarian from Portland who came to my office last spring completely frustrated. She had been walking 30 minutes every morning for years, carefully counting her carbohydrates and taking her medications exactly as prescribed. Yet her blood sugar readings remained stubbornly high, and she felt increasingly exhausted. Margaret told me with tears in her eyes that she was doing everything right, but her body seemed to be fighting against her. What she didn't realize was that her well-intentioned habits, while not harmful, simply weren't optimized for her aging metabolism. When we introduced these 5 alternative habits I'm about to share, her morning readings dropped by an average of 30 points within 6 weeks, and she finally felt like she had control again. The first habit that works remarkably better for people over 60 is strategic meal timing with a twist that most doctors don't emphasize enough. Instead of eating 3 standard meals at conventional times, shifting your largest meal to mid-morning and having a moderate lunch by 1 in the afternoon, followed by a very light early dinner, can dramatically improve how your body processes glucose. This isn't just about intermittent fasting, which has become popular recently. This is about understanding that as we age, our pancreatic function follows a circadian rhythm that peaks earlier in the day. Let me introduce you to Robert Chen, a 68-year-old retired accountant from Seattle. Robert had type 2 diabetes for nearly a decade, and despite medication, his hemoglobin A1C hovered around 8.2, which concerned both of us greatly. He was eating healthy foods, but following the traditional breakfast-lunch-dinner pattern with his largest meal at dinner time, around 7 in the evening. Robert shared with me that he often felt sluggish after dinner and would wake up with elevated blood sugar readings that frustrated him every single morning. His wife mentioned that he seemed increasingly withdrawn, worried that his diabetes was spiraling out of control despite his best efforts. When I suggested shifting his eating pattern, Robert was skeptical. He had decades of habit behind him. But he agreed to try for 1 month. We moved his substantial meal to 10 in the morning, a hearty lunch by noon or 1, and by 6 in the evening, he would have just a light bowl of soup or a small salad with some protein. The transformation was remarkable. Within 3 weeks, his morning readings dropped from the 150s and 160s down to the 1-teens and low 120s. His energy improved dramatically, and he told me he felt mentally sharper throughout the day. After 6 months, his hemoglobin A1C had dropped to 7.1. Robert's success taught both of us that when you eat matters just as much as what you eat, especially after 60. The biological explanation here is fascinating. Our insulin sensitivity is highest in the morning hours and gradually decreases as the day progresses. Additionally, our digestive enzymes are most active earlier in the day. When we consume large meals late in the evening, our aging bodies struggle to process that glucose efficiently, leading to elevated blood sugar through the night and into the next morning. By front-loading our caloric intake, we work with our body's natural rhythms instead of against them. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, comment below to show you're following along. This next habit might surprise you even more. The second habit that consistently outperforms traditional exercise recommendations is gentle resistance training combined with very short movement breaks throughout the day, rather than one continuous cardio session. Now, I'm not dismissing the value of cardiovascular exercise. Walking, swimming, and cycling are all beneficial. However, for blood sugar management specifically in people over 60, brief resistance exercises every 2 to 3 hours appear to have superior effects on glucose metabolism. Let me tell you about Dorothy Martinez, a 75-year-old former elementary school teacher from Austin. Dorothy had been faithfully walking for 45 minutes every morning for years. She loved her morning walks, but despite this consistent exercise, her blood sugar remained problematic, frequently spiking above 200 after meals. She came to me feeling defeated, wondering if exercise even mattered anymore. Dorothy lived alone after her husband passed, and she told me that seeing those high numbers on her glucose meter made her feel like her body was betraying her, no matter how hard she tried. I suggested something completely different. Instead of her single morning walk, I asked Dorothy to do 5 minutes of simple resistance exercises every 2 to 3 hours throughout the day. We're talking about basic movements: chair squats while holding a soup can in each hand, wall push-ups, standing on her toes repeatedly, or gentle bicep curls with light weights. Nothing strenuous. Just brief, consistent muscle engagement. Additionally, whenever she finished a meal, I asked her to do a gentle 10-minute walk around her home or yard. Dorothy was confused at first. This seemed too simple, too easy to make a real difference. But she trusted me and committed to trying. After just 2 weeks, she noticed her post-meal spikes were significantly lower. Where she used to see readings of 200 to 220 after lunch, she was now seeing 140 to 160. After 2 months, her overall blood sugar control had improved so much that we were able to reduce one of her medications. Dorothy told me she felt stronger, more capable, and most importantly, hopeful again. The science behind this approach is compelling. When we use our muscles, even briefly, they pull glucose from our bloodstream for immediate energy. This happens independently of insulin, which becomes increasingly important as we age and our insulin response becomes less efficient. By spacing these brief resistance sessions throughout the day, we create multiple opportunities for our muscles to clear glucose from our blood. Additionally, building and maintaining muscle mass is crucial for older adults because muscle tissue is where most of our glucose gets stored and utilized. The more functional muscle mass we maintain, the better our overall glucose metabolism. But here's something that might shock you even more. The third habit involves something most people do every single day, but in completely the wrong order. The third habit is consuming a specific type of food before your main meal. And I'm not talking about salad, although vegetables are wonderful. I'm referring to consuming a small amount of protein and healthy fat approximately 15 to 20 minutes before your carbohydrate-rich portion of the meal. This simple timing shift can reduce the glucose spike from that meal by 30 to 40% in many older adults. Consider the case of James Wilson, a 69-year-old retired police officer from Denver. James had struggled with blood sugar control for 8 years, despite eating what he considered healthy meals. He would start lunch with a sandwich and fruit, or begin dinner with pasta or rice alongside his protein and vegetables. Everything on his plate was nutritious, but the order and timing weren't optimized for his metabolism. James shared with me that he felt like a prisoner to his blood sugar monitor, constantly anxious about every meal. His daughter worried about him living alone, frequently calling to check if he was okay. When I explained the concept of food sequencing to James, he was intrigued but doubtful. Could something so simple really make a difference? I asked him to try eating 3 or 4 bites of protein and a small handful of nuts about 15 minutes before his regular meal. Then, when he sat down to eat, to consume his vegetables and protein first, saving any bread, pasta, rice, or starchy vegetables for the end of the meal. The results were dramatic. James began checking his blood sugar 1 hour after meals and was astonished. His typical post-lunch spike of 190 to 210 dropped to 140 to 160. his post-dinner readings improved even more dramatically. Within 3 months, James felt liberated. He could enjoy meals with his family without the constant anxiety. He told me that this simple change gave him back a sense of normalcy he thought he'd lost forever. The physiological mechanism here involves slowing gastric emptying and moderating the absorption rate of glucose into your bloodstream. When protein and fat enter your stomach first, they trigger hormones that slow down digestion. This creates a buffer effect, so when carbohydrates arrive, they're absorbed more gradually rather than flooding your system all at once. For older adults whose insulin response is already delayed, this timing strategy provides crucial support to an aging metabolic system. Now, if that surprised you, wait until you hear about the fourth habit, because it involves something that happens every single night. The fourth habit concerns sleep, but not in the way you might think. Most advice focuses on getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which is certainly important. However, for blood sugar management in people over 60, the temperature of your sleeping environment and the timing of your last meal relative to sleep have profound effects that are rarely discussed adequately. Let me share the story of Patricia Anderson, a 71-year-old retired nurse from Minneapolis. Patricia knew intellectually that sleep mattered for blood sugar control, but despite sleeping 8 hours consistently, her morning fasting glucose was always elevated, typically between 130 and 150. She would wake up feeling unrested despite adequate sleep duration. Patricia felt frustrated because, as a nurse, she understood diabetes management, yet couldn't seem to control her own blood sugar. She worried constantly about long-term complications and whether she would remain independent as she aged. When I reviewed her complete daily routine, I discovered 2 critical issues. First, Patricia kept her bedroom quite warm because she felt cold easily, maintaining the temperature around 74 degrees. Second, she was eating her last meal around 8 in the evening and going to bed by 9:30, giving her body barely 90 minutes to process dinner before sleep. I suggested 2 changes. First, lower her bedroom temperature to between 65 and 68 degrees and use extra blankets if needed. Second, finish her last meal by 6:30 in the evening, allowing at least 3 hours before bedtime. Patricia was skeptical about the temperature change, worried she would be uncomfortable, but she agreed to try both modifications for 1 month. The transformation in her morning blood sugar readings was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, her fasting glucose dropped from the 130s and 140s down to the 110s and even occasional readings in the high 90s. She began waking up feeling genuinely refreshed. After 2 months, her hemoglobin A1C had improved significantly, and she told me she felt like a different person. Patricia realized she had spent years fighting against her body's natural needs instead of working with them. The science here is fascinating and often overlooked. When we sleep in cooler environments, our bodies maintain better insulin sensitivity. Core body temperature naturally drops during sleep, and this cooling process is associated with improved metabolic function. When the ambient temperature is too warm, this natural cooling is disrupted, affecting glucose metabolism. Additionally, going to sleep while still actively digesting a meal forces the body to manage 2 metabolically demanding processes simultaneously. As we age, our bodies become less efficient at multitasking metabolically. By allowing adequate time between eating and sleeping, we give our aging systems the opportunity to handle digestion properly before shifting into sleep mode restoration and repair. And now for the 5th habit, which might be the most unexpected of all. The 5th habit involves hydration, but with specific timing and a particular focus that most people completely miss. Standard advice tells us to drink plenty of water throughout the day, which is certainly correct. However, for blood sugar management in older adults, drinking a specific amount of water at strategic times, particularly 1 glass 20 minutes before each meal and 1 glass upon waking, consistently shows better results than random hydration throughout the day. Let me tell you about Helen O'Brien, a 73-year-old retired administrative assistant from Boston. Helen had type 2 diabetes, and despite medication and dietary changes, her blood sugar remained unpredictable. Some days would be reasonable, others would be concerningly high with no apparent pattern. This unpredictability was perhaps the most stressful aspect for Helen. She told me she felt like she was guessing blindly, never sure what her readings would show. Her son wanted her to move in with him and his family because he worried about her managing alone, but Helen desperately wanted to maintain her independence. When I reviewed her habits, I noticed Helen drank very little water throughout the day, maybe 3 or 4 glasses total. Like many older adults, she had diminished thirst sensation and often simply forgot to drink water. I explained that even mild dehydration significantly impairs glucose metabolism and that her kidneys needed adequate hydration to help regulate blood sugar effectively. I gave Helen a very specific protocol: 1 full glass of water immediately upon waking, 1 glass 20 minutes before breakfast, 1 glass 20 minutes before lunch, 1 glass 20 minutes before dinner, and 1 glass mid-morning and mid-afternoon. That would give her 6 glasses of water at strategic times. Helen worried about bathroom trips, a common concern among older adults, but I explained we would adjust timing if needed. The change in her blood sugar patterns was striking. Within 1 week, Helen noticed more consistency in her readings. The dramatic, unexplained spikes became much less frequent. Her morning readings stabilized. After 6 weeks, her overall control had improved so much that her son stopped pressuring her to move. Helen felt empowered again, back in control of her health and her life. The mechanism involves several factors. Adequate hydration helps your kidneys excrete excess glucose through urine more efficiently. Water consumed before meals provides gastric volume that slows eating pace and improves satiety signals, often leading to smaller portion sizes naturally. Additionally, mild dehydration causes blood to become more concentrated, which paradoxically makes blood sugar readings appear higher than they actually are in terms of glucose load. For older adults who naturally have reduced thirst sensation, this strategic scheduled approach to hydration ensures consistent, adequate intake. Now, let me share something that many of my patients ask about once they start implementing these 5 habits. They want to know why their previous efforts weren't working as well, and more importantly, what was actually happening inside their bodies that made these alternative approaches so much more effective. Understanding the why behind these strategies can help you stay motivated and make informed adjustments as you progress. When we reach our 60s, our bodies undergo what I call metabolic recalibration. This isn't failure or deterioration, it's simply change. Your pancreas, which has been producing insulin for 6 decades or more, begins to slow down production. But here's what most people don't realize. The timing of insulin release also changes. In younger adults, insulin response to a meal is swift and robust. By 60 and beyond, that response becomes delayed and less vigorous. This is why eating your largest meal when your natural insulin production is at its daily peak, which happens in the morning hours, makes such logical sense. Let me tell you about another patient, Thomas Brennan, a 66-year-old retired construction worker from Philadelphia. Thomas came to me after his previous doctor had increased his diabetes medication for the 3rd time in 2 years. He felt discouraged and frankly scared about what this progression meant for his future. Thomas had a daughter getting married in 6 months, and he desperately wanted to walk her down the aisle feeling healthy and strong, not weak and medication-dependent. Thomas was doing many things right. He had quit smoking 5 years earlier, he avoided sugary drinks, and he tried to stay active. But his approach to meals was sabotaging his efforts without him realizing it. He would skip breakfast entirely because he wasn't hungry in the morning, have a moderate lunch around 1 in the afternoon, and then eat a very large dinner around 7:30 in the evening, because that's when his family gathered. On weekends, dinner was even later, sometimes 8:30 or 9. His reasoning made perfect sense to him. Why eat when you're not hungry, and isn't family dinner important? I explained to Thomas that while family dinners are indeed wonderful, the timing was working against his metabolic health. His body was essentially fasting until 1 in the afternoon, then asking his already sluggish insulin response to handle a massive glucose load at the worst possible time of day, when insulin sensitivity is at its lowest. It was like asking someone to lift the heaviest weight of the day when they're already exhausted. We restructured Thomas's eating pattern completely. I asked him to have a substantial breakfast by 8:30 in the morning, even if he didn't feel particularly hungry. A good breakfast with protein, healthy fats, and some complex carbohydrates. Then a solid lunch by 1. For the family dinners he cherished, I suggested he participate fully in the social aspect, but eat a smaller portion, having already consumed most of his daily calories earlier. On weekends when dinner was late, he could have an even lighter meal, perhaps just protein and vegetables. Thomas was worried his family would be offended or that he'd feel deprived during these gatherings. But I helped him reframe his thinking. He wasn't missing out on family time. He was ensuring he'd be healthy enough to enjoy many more years of family gatherings. We also worked on communication strategies so his family understood he was making these changes for his health, not because he didn't enjoy their cooking. The transformation was profound. Within 8 weeks, Thomas's blood sugar readings had improved so dramatically that we actually reduced his medication rather than increasing it. He had more energy throughout the day. His mood improved. When his daughter's wedding day arrived, Thomas told me he had never felt better. He danced with his daughter, enjoyed the celebration, and stayed energetic the entire evening. He sent me a photo from the wedding with a note that simply said, "Thank you for giving me my life back." Thomas's story illustrates something crucial. These habits require us to sometimes go against our immediate preferences or long-standing routines. Change is uncomfortable initially, but the payoff in terms of how you feel, your blood sugar control, and your long-term health outcomes makes that temporary discomfort worthwhile. If you're still with me and finding this information valuable, please comment below. Your engagement helps me understand what topics matter most to you. Another question I frequently hear is about exercise intensity and duration. Many of my patients have been told they need to exercise vigorously for at least 30 minutes continuously to see any benefit for blood sugar control. This advice, while not wrong for general cardiovascular health, actually misses something important about glucose metabolism, especially in older adults. Let me introduce you to Barbara Lewis, a 70-year-old retired accountant from Chicago. Barbara had rheumatoid arthritis in her knees, which made sustained exercise painful and, frankly, unrealistic. She felt guilty about not being able to do the long walks or exercise classes her doctor recommended. Her blood sugar was poorly controlled, and she blamed herself for not being able to exercise properly. Barbara told me through tears during our first appointment that she felt like a failure, that her body had betrayed her, and that she was disappointing everyone who cared about her. I explained to Barbara that sustained cardio exercise, while beneficial, isn't the only way, or even necessarily the best way to manage blood sugar. What matters most for glucose control is muscle contraction frequency throughout the day. Every time our muscles contract, they pull glucose from the bloodstream for immediate energy. This happens through a pathway that doesn't even require insulin, which is incredibly important for people with diabetes whose insulin function is impaired. We developed a plan for Barbara that she could actually sustain. Every 2 hours while she was awake, she would do just 5 minutes of gentle resistance work. Seated leg extensions, arm curls with light weights, wall push-ups, or even just standing up and sitting down repeatedly from a chair. 5 minutes every 2 hours. That's it. No long, painful walks. No trying to keep up with an exercise class. Just brief, consistent muscle activation. Barbara was skeptical, but relieved that I wasn't asking her to do something that would aggravate her arthritis. She committed to trying the protocol for 1 month. Within 2 weeks, she called my office excited to report that her post-meal blood sugar spikes had decreased noticeably. After 6 weeks, her overall control had improved more than it had in the previous 2 years of trying to force herself through painful long walks. What Barbara discovered, and what research supports, is that frequency of muscle engagement matters more than duration when it comes to blood sugar management. Those brief sessions every couple of hours create multiple opportunities throughout the day for glucose clearance. Additionally, by building and maintaining muscle mass through regular resistance work, even gentle resistance, we increase the body's overall capacity to store and utilize glucose. Barbara also noticed something unexpected. Her arthritis pain actually decreased. This wasn't a direct effect of the exercises themselves, but rather a secondary benefit of better blood sugar control. Chronically elevated blood sugar promotes inflammation throughout the body, which exacerbates conditions like arthritis. As her glucose levels stabilized, her overall inflammation decreased, providing some relief to her joints. Now, let me address the food sequencing strategy in more depth, because this is where I see patients make subtle mistakes that reduce the effectiveness of this approach. The concept seems simple: eat protein and fat before carbohydrates. But the execution requires some nuance for optimal results. Consider Richard Foster, a 67-year-old retired engineer from San Diego. Richard was meticulous and detail-oriented, which served him well in his engineering career. When I explained food sequencing to him, he immediately implemented it, but he wasn't seeing the dramatic improvements other patients experienced. When we reviewed his approach more carefully, I discovered the problem. Richard was eating his protein first, then immediately eating his carbohydrates, giving his body almost no time to respond to the initial protein consumption. I explained that the magic of food sequencing isn't just about order, it's about timing. When protein enters your stomach, it triggers the release of hormones like GLP-1 and peptide YY. These hormones slow gastric emptying and signal satiety. But these hormones need approximately 15 to 20 minutes to begin exerting their effects. If you eat protein and then immediately consume carbohydrates, you've essentially negated the benefit. We adjusted Richard's approach. Before sitting down to his main meal, he would eat 3 or 4 ounces of protein, perhaps some grilled chicken, a piece of salmon, or even a handful of nuts if he was having a lighter meal. He would then wait 15 to 20 minutes, during which he might read the newspaper or watch the news. Only then would he sit down to eat his complete meal, starting with vegetables, then any remaining protein, and finally his carbohydrates. The difference was remarkable. Richard's 1-hour post-meal blood sugar readings, which had been improving modestly with his initial approach, now showed dramatic improvement. Where he had been seeing readings in the 160s and 170s after implementing basic food sequencing, he was now consistently in the 130s and 140s with the properly timed approach. Richard, with his engineering mindset, appreciated understanding the precise mechanism and timing required for optimal results. This level of detail might seem excessive to some people, but for those truly committed to optimizing their blood sugar control, these nuances make a meaningful difference. You don't have to be as precise as Richard if that feels overwhelming. Even a basic version of protein before carbs will help. But if you're implementing the strategy and not seeing the results you hoped for, timing might be the missing piece. Let me also talk about something that often gets overlooked in blood sugar management discussions: the role of stress and its physiological impact on glucose levels. I've had patients whose blood sugar would be well controlled for weeks, then suddenly spike for no apparent dietary or exercise reason. When we investigated further, we'd discover a stressful life event, a family conflict, financial worry, or health concern about a spouse. Sarah Mitchell, a 74-year-old retired teacher from Atlanta, experienced exactly this pattern. Her blood sugar had been beautifully controlled for 3 months using the strategies we'd implemented. Then suddenly, her readings began creeping up despite no changes in her diet or activity. When I asked about her life circumstances, Sarah revealed that her husband had recently been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. She was terrified about the future, worried about becoming his caregiver while managing her own health, and stressed about the financial implications of his care needs. I explained to Sarah that chronic stress triggers the release of cortisol and other stress hormones that directly raise blood sugar levels. This is an ancient survival mechanism, your body flooding your bloodstream with glucose to provide energy for fight or flight. In modern life, where our stresses are chronic rather than acute, this mechanism works against us. For someone with diabetes, stress becomes a significant obstacle to blood sugar control. We couldn't eliminate Sarah's stress. Her situation was genuinely difficult. But we could add stress management techniques to her daily routine. I suggested she try gentle meditation for just 10 minutes each morning, practice deep breathing exercises when she felt overwhelmed, and consider joining a caregiver support group where she could share her feelings with others in similar situations. Sarah was initially dismissive of these suggestions. How could sitting quietly or breathing differently possibly affect her blood sugar? But she trusted our relationship and agreed to try. Within 3 weeks, her blood sugar readings began stabilizing again. The meditation and breathing exercises didn't change her circumstances, but they changed her physiological stress response. Her cortisol levels decreased, which allowed her blood sugar to return to better control. Sarah's experience taught both of us that blood sugar management isn't purely about food and exercise. It's holistic. Your emotional health, stress levels, sleep quality, and even your social connections all play roles in metabolic health. Ignoring these factors while obsessing over carbohydrate counts is like trying to solve a puzzle while ignoring half the pieces. Now, here's what's crucial to understand about all 5 of these habits. They work synergistically. Margaret, Robert, Dorothy, James, Patricia, and Helen all eventually incorporated multiple strategies, not just one. The combination creates a comprehensive approach that addresses blood sugar management from multiple angles simultaneously. What makes these 5 habits particularly effective for people over 60 compared to standard recommendations is that they specifically address the physiological changes that occur with aging. Our insulin production decreases and becomes less efficient. Our muscle mass naturally declines. Our circadian rhythms shift. Our digestion slows. Our thirst sensation diminishes. Standard advice often treats a 65-year-old body as if it functions identically to a 40-year-old body, which simply isn't true. These strategies I've shared today acknowledge and work with your aging physiology rather than against it. They don't require expensive equipment, complicated meal plans, or exhausting exercise routines. They're sustainable, practical adjustments that fit into real life. However, I want to be very clear about something important. These habits are not a replacement for medical care, prescribed medications, or professional guidance. They are complementary strategies that enhance and support your overall diabetes management plan. Every person's situation is unique. What worked beautifully for Margaret or Robert or Helen might need modification for your specific circumstances. If you're currently taking diabetes medications, do not make changes without consulting your healthcare provider. As your blood sugar improves with these habits, your medication needs may decrease, but those adjustments must be made under medical supervision to avoid dangerous hypoglycemia. Similarly, if you have other health conditions, particularly kidney disease, heart conditions, or mobility limitations, some of these recommendations may need to be adapted to your situation. I encourage you to have an honest conversation with your doctor about incorporating these strategies into your diabetes management plan. Bring this information to your next appointment. Ask questions. Most physicians will be supportive of lifestyle modifications that can enhance metabolic health, especially when you approach it as a collaborative discussion rather than a replacement for their treatment recommendations. Remember that sustainable change happens gradually. You don't need to implement all 5 habits simultaneously. Perhaps start with the meal timing strategy or the brief resistance exercises throughout the day. Once that becomes comfortable and routine, add the food sequencing approach. Then optimize your sleep environment and meal timing before bed. Finally, establish your strategic hydration schedule. Building habits incrementally leads to lasting change rather than overwhelming yourself and giving up entirely. Blood sugar management after 60 doesn't have to feel like a constant battle you're destined to lose. With the right strategies tailored to your aging body's actual needs, you absolutely can achieve better control, feel more energetic, and maintain the independence and quality of life you deserve. Your body is still remarkably capable of healing and adapting. It simply needs the right support and approach. I hope this information empowers you to take meaningful action for your health. If you found this video helpful, please share it with friends or family members who might benefit. Leave your questions or experiences in the comments below. I genuinely read them all and use your feedback to create future content that addresses your most pressing concerns. Take care of yourself and remember that every positive change you make, no matter how small it might seem, is an investment in your health and your future. You're worth that effort.